How you doing there? Welcome back to Babble on Talmud. Today we're studying Daf Pei Gimel, Daf 83 of Masechta Chullin. Friends, Daf 83, we wrap up Perek Oso Vez Beno. That was a pretty quick Perek. Where did it start? Daf Sam, it was like 5-6 daf or something. Pretty short Perek there, Perek Oso Vez Beno, and we begin Perek Kisui hadam. It's very exciting because it's like a halacha that I feel like is not too much discussed. So when it comes up, it's like, I wish I knew a little more about that. So we will be able to learn a whole bunch about Kisui hadam in the next week or so. Now, on today's daf, the first section is meat mongers informing customers about Oso v'es Bino. We talked about it a little bit yesterday in terms of Reuven and Shimon coordinating amongst themselves who gets to shech today and who has to wait till tomorrow. We're going to learn a Mishnah that discusses that there are 4 times throughout the year that, for example, I'll just give one example, Erev Pesach, for example. Erev Pesach, every meat monger knows that whoever is buying meat, right, whoever is buying an animal that day is going to shecht it so that they have, right, forget about Pesach, it's just you don't get confused. Shavuos, the point I'm making is that it's a Yom Tov, right? So Shavuos, let's say. Anybody on Erev Shavuos who's buying an animal, the assumption is they're buying it and they're going to shecht it that day for Yom Tov. And therefore, if the meat monger, or the animal monger really, knows that he monged the mother to one person, so before monging the daughter to somebody else, he has an obligation to tell them, look, I monged the mother earlier today, wait till tomorrow to shecht it because it's likely going to be Oso v'es Bino, because the assumption is on a day like Erev Shavuos, whoever buys a animal is shechting it that day. So therefore, the monger has a responsibility to inform his customer that he should wait till the next day, because otherwise there's a high likelihood that there will be Oso v'es Bino going on. Anyways, so that's the first section of today's daf. We'll learn a Mishnah where we discuss meat mongers informing customers about Oso v'es Bino. Next, we will discuss purchasing meat on Erev Yom Tov. It's going to be a little bit of a Babble Mitzvah sugya, which tingles my heart a little bit and makes my eyes water a little bit. Babble Mitzvah, even 2 years later, that's how you know that it's true love. 2 years later, even after we've learned a whole bunch of other things, and we've been deep in Kodshim for almost a year now, but just a little retro, the smallest little throwback to Babble Mitzvah, Perek Azov. Ooh, it just touches my soul. So we're going to have just a little bit of a tease, a Babble Mitzvah tease we're going to have on today's daf. Then we discuss defining a day for Oso v'es Bino. Of course, the Pasuk says, Oso v'es Bino lo sishchatu b'yom echad. What is the definition of Yom Echad? 24 hours. Is it the night following the day, like by korbanos? Is it the day following the night? Right? Does the day start with the day followed by the night, like by korbanos, or does it start with the night followed by the day, like by pretty much everything else? So we're going to discuss that, which will take us to the end of Perek Oso v'es Bino. We will then begin Perek Kisui hadam, and the first sugya in the Gemara of Perek Kisui hadam is about Kisui hadam for Kodshim. When it comes to korbanos, when it comes to kodshim, if there's kisui hadam. So friends, that's what we have ahead of us. It should not be, I really don't anticipate a particularly long daf like has been the last few days. So let's see how it goes. But come, join me, and let's have a great time learning Daf Pei Gimel, Daf 83 of Masechta Chullin. Friends, we begin on Daf Pei Gimel Amid Aleph, 3 lines into the wide line. So we're already into the daf already. Yesterday was a very big daf, and a small part of the reason why is because we also went a bit into Daf Pei Gimel. Anyways, we shall begin at Daf Pei Gimel with Aleph at the Mishnah, 3 lines into the wide lines. Barboya prokim bashonit, 4 times per year. Hamocher behema lachavero, a animal monger, tzarich lodio, needs to inform his customer, ima macharti l'shchot, bita macharti l'shchot, that I have already sold this animal's mother for shchita or its daughter for shchita. For example, if it is So let's give the examples. These are the 4 times per year. Erev Yom Tov Achron Shel Chag. On Erev Shmini Atzeres. Ve'erev Yom Tov Rishon Shel Pesach. On Erev Pesach. Ve'erev Atzeres. On Erev Shavuos. Ve'erev Rosh Hashanah. And on Erev Rosh Hashanah. The elephant in the room, of course, is what about Erev Sukkot? So Tosfos says the reason why Erev Sukkot is not on the list is because he says that everyone's so busy putting together their lulav or finding a lulav and building a sukkah. There's so many things to do on Erev Sukkot that people won't have time to also shecht and process and everything animals. So that is why Erev Sukkot is not on the list. But Erev Shmini Atzeres is, Erev Pesach, Erev Shavuos, and also Erev Rosh Hashanah. So therefore, if somebody sells a mother, right? So if a animal monger, or even just somebody who has animals and he's selling it to his friend, so if he sells the mother to one friend on Erev Shavuos, for example, if then later on in the day he sells the daughter or the son to another friend, he has to tell them, look, I sold the mother earlier today. We have to assume that it's going to be shechted today. You need to wait till shecht until tomorrow. Right? You could shecht on Yom Tov. And according to Rabbi Yosef Aglili, also Erev Yom Kippur in the Galilee, they would also, you would also make that assumption that everything is being slaughtered on that day, and you have to be concerned about also Ves Bino. Amar Buda says, Rabbi Yehuda, Masai. However, when is this? Bisman she'ein lo revach, when there is no space. Aval yesh lo revach, but if there is space, ein tzarich lo dio, you do not need the animal monger need not make that disclaimer. What does this even mean? So there is, my understanding is sort of the more commonly accepted explanation, which is that of Rashi, which means, so let's read it with the pshat of Rashi, which is, says Abuda Emase, when is this that the animal monger needs to inform the customer? Bisman she'ein lo revach, when there's no space, meaning both animals were sold on the same day, on Erev Shavuos, for example. Aval yesh lo revach, but if there is space, i.e., if the mother was sold the day before, and the daughter is being sold on Erev Shavuos. I'm using Shavuos as an example, but obviously it could be any of the 4 examples. Ein tzarich lo dio, then you don't need to let them know. So according to Rashi, what this means is that when the animal monger sells both the mother and the daughter, of course it could also be a son, but I'm choosing mother and daughter as an example, as I have been using mostly as an example. So if the seller sells the mother and daughter, both of them on Erev Shavuos, to 2 separate people, he needs to inform the later customer that he had already sold the mother to an earlier customer, and that the later customer needs to be informed to wait till shecht until the next day. That is, if both animals were sold on Erev Shavuos. But if one of the animals was sold the day before, well, then we don't need to assume that the person who purchased the day before is waiting until Erev Shavuos to shecht. No. If they were sold on different days, the seller does not need to say anything. It's only when there's no space, when they're the same day, that is when the seller needs to inform the customer. The Rambam has a different explanation here, which is that the revach means if there's still time left in the day, meaning if the animal seller knows that he sold the mother earlier today, and now it's mamish getting late in the day, Erev Shavuos, mamish, some guy comes hustling over to the animal monger, he's looking at his watch, and he's saying, oy vavoy, it's getting so late, and he buys an animal. He's looking at his watch because he's running out of time to get home and check this animal and clean it and prepare it before Yom Tov. So in that case, when it's clear, there's no time left, there's no space, there's no time, so then it's clear to the seller that this person is rushing, the customer is rushing to get home and have enough time to shecht it and do everything else he needs. So therefore, that's why the seller has the obligation to tell the buyer that you can't shecht it today. But if there was plenty of time left in the day and it's not obvious that the buyer is going home to shecht it today, then the seller has no obligation. So to inform about the mother that was sold. So two different shots over there. Rashi says that if they're both the same day, no matter what, the customer needs to be informed. But if they were sold on separate days, the customer does not need to be informed. The Rambam says that even if it's the same day, if there's still time left in the day, the customer does not need to be informed. Only if the customer is buying mamash right before Yom Tov, he's looking at his clock, it's clear that he is rushing to shecht it on time. So then the seller must tell the customer that he sold the mother earlier that day. Mother of Yehuda, Rabbi Yehuda admits that when the mother is sold l'chosin, bas l'kala, that if the mother is sold to the chosin's side, right? If there's going to be a chosin kala, and the chosin comes and he buys the mother, and then later on the kala comes and buys the daughter, shetzarich lodio, even if they bought them on two separate days, right? The chosin bought the mother the day before, the kala bought it that day. Nonetheless, the seller, the monger, would have to inform the kala that the chosin had bought the mother, and that they have to be careful not to shecht it on the same day, because clearly they are both buying meat, buying animals for their chasana, and they are likely going to be shechted on the same day. So when it comes to the chosin and kala both buying, right, a mother and a daughter respectively, so in that case the monger has the responsibility to inform the customers that they need to be careful not to shecht them both on the same day, on the day of the chasana. And on these 4 days of the year, mashchitin es taboch bal korcho afilu shor shove 1,000 dinarim ve'eno lelokeach elo dinar echad kofen oso lishchot. That on these 4 days, Erev Shavuos we've been using as an example. On Erev Shavuos, for example, if a customer comes to the meat monger and he says, I want a dinar's worth of meat, and he pays the monger a dinar, so we require the monger to shecht that animal, even though the customer wants just a dinar's worth of meat, and the animal costs 1,000 dinars. And the monger is like, wait, and the shaykh is like, what am I going to do with the other 999 zuzes? Dinar and zuzes are the same thing, if you remember from Nezikin and from Noshin. So the shaykh, the butcher, he says, what am I going to do with the other 999 dinars? We say, nonetheless, this customer paid you good money, paid you a dinar, he needs to get his meat, and we force the butcher to shecht the 1,000 dinar animal so that this customer can get his 1 dinar's worth of meat. Again, barba prakim elu, on these 4 days, mashchitin es taboch bal korcho, we force the butcher to shecht against his will, afilu shor shave 1,000 dinarim, even if that means that he has to shecht an ox that's worth 1,000 zuzes, ve'eno lokeach el dinar, and the lokeach, the customer, had only paid him 1 dinar. Kofen also lishchot, we nonetheless force the butcher to shecht the 1,000 dinar animal so that this customer can get his 1 dinar's worth of meat that he paid for. And the Gemara is going to explain why. This is the Babble Metzia Sugya. And therefore, what if the animal dropped dead before the butcher had an opportunity to shecht it? So whose loss is it? Well, it's the customer's loss, meaning it works both ways, right? On the one hand, we're considering it like his payment of the money is a kinyan and it belongs to him, and therefore he has every right to receive the meat that he paid for, and therefore we force the butcher to shecht it. At the same time, it works both ways. If the animal dies, well, before it was shechted, well, then the 1 dinar's worth of meat that was paid for and owned by the customer died with the animal, and he lost his investment. He lost his money. He lost his meat. However, this would not be the case during any other of the days of the year. This would not be the case when the customer pays for a dinar of meat. He doesn't yet own his meat, and we would not require the butcher to shech the animal for him. And therefore, the flip side is, if, since we're saying that by the customer paying the money, the dinar, on any other day of the year, he does not own his portion of the cow by paying the money, well, then the cow entirely belongs to the butcher, and if the cow drops dead, it is a loss to the butcher, rather than saying that the customer would lose his money. And again, that is the Babble Metzia sugya there at the end of the Mishnah that we will get to in the Gemara. Says the Gemara, Tana, that we learned about Im lo odio olich v'shochet ve'enu nimna. Look, we had said these 4 times of year, 4 times of the year, the animal monger has an obligation to inform his customers that he sold the mother already, and that you need to wait to shecht until the next day. But if he didn't, right, lo odio, if he didn't let the customers know, it's nisht gefährlich, holech v'shochet ve'enu nimna, the customers, it's not a big deal that they went home and shechted the animals. They didn't know. And okay, so if he didn't tell them, it's not the end of the world. Amr Buda says, Masai, when do we say that the animal monger needs to inform his customers? We said, let's assume, like Rashi says, if they're being sold on the same day, but if they're sold on different days, he has no obligation to tell anybody. So then the Mishnah had said that if you have a chosin that's buying the mother and a kala is buying the daughter, so we say that the monger needs to inform them, hey, I know that you're buying meat for the chasana, you're probably going to be checking them on the day of the chasana, you should know, you have to be careful about osav es beno. Why did the Mishnah specifically need to say that the mother is being sold to the chasin and that the daughter is being sold to the kala? Why not just say one of them was sold to the chasin and the other was sold to the kala? Why is it important that it's the mother sold to the chasin and the daughter sold to the kala? Milsagab orcha kamashmalan, that it's teaching us along the way a common practice thing, which is dorech ara, that it is common practice limitrach be chasana tvei mibe kalasa, that it is sort of general practice that the chasin's family, that the chasin will be, what is it, limitrach be, right? The orech ara limitrach be chasana tvei mibe kalasa, that the chasin's side is being toreach more than the kala, right? The chasin is buying the mother, which I assume the point is the bigger animal, and the kala side is buying the smaller animal, which reminds me, right, of a principle that we saw in Ksubis of ein adam, what was it? Ein adam torech besuda o mafsido, right? Was that it? Ein adam torech besuda o mafsido, something like that, right? Ein adam torech besuda o mafsido, something like that. Right, that the assumption in those Gemaras over there in Ksubis were that it's the chasin, it's the husband who's really making the wedding. And okay, so we see a similar idea over here, that it's the chasin who's buying the more substantial animal, who's buying the cow, and it's the kala who is buying the calf, the daughter. And now we get to a little tease, a little Babble Metzia teaser. I am looking forward to this. So we had said that on these 4 times of a year, if the customer, once he pays for his dinar's worth of meat, he owns a dinar's worth of meat. So therefore, if the butcher has an ox that's worth 1,000 dinars, once the customer has paid good money, he has paid his dinar to the butcher, he owns a dinar's worth of meat, in that, a dinar's worth of meat. And if it means that the butcher now needs to shecht an ox that's worth 1,000 shekels, 1,000 zuzes, zuz and dinar are the same, 1,000 zuzes, so that this customer can get his dinar's worth of meat, so be it. So now, frag the Gemara, if you remember from Perek Azov and Babble Mitzia, paying money doesn't make a kinyan. Picking it up makes the kinyan. You remember the pizza shop, the pizza monger? When you pay for your pizza, you don't own your pizza yet. When you pick up your pizza, you own your pizza. So the Gemara's kasha is, I don't understand. Why are we forcing the butcher to shecht an ox that's worth 1,000? What's he going to do with the rest of the 999 zuzas worth of meat? After all, the customer paid money, so what? You don't own it until you pick it up. Oh, V'aloi mashach. The customer never made a kinyan mishicha. Woo. Amar Avuna. Amar Rav says Avuna dem Rab kishamashach. All right. Well, it's talking about where he did make a kinyan mishicha. Yach, if that's the case, Ema Seifa. But then what about the Seifa? Hava b'shayim Moshe the rest of the year. Ain't okay. That's not the case. The customer doesn't own it. The ficha chameis meis lemocher, and if it dies, it's the loss of the butcher because the customer doesn't own it. But if we're talking about where he made a kinyan meshicha, of course the customer owns it. V'amashach, he did a kinyan meshicha. Okay, so first answer is the following. Amr Shmuel bar Rav Yitzchak le'olam shelo mashach. Okay, it's talking about where there was no kinyan meshicha. Okay, so again, explain to me why on these 4 days the customer owns his dinar's worth of meat. Uchegon shezika lo ayedei acher. It's talking about, so the money did not make the kinyan. The customer came into the butcher shop, paid the butcher a dinar, but, or even, I guess technically, does he have to even have, it could even be that, for this answer, I think technically the customer probably didn't even need to give any money to the butcher. But what happened was the butcher, what does it say? What does Rashi say? Basically, so if Ruvain is the butcher and Shimon is the customer, so I'm reading Rashi, and the first wide line of Rashi, Hamocher, Ruvain, the butcher, Hazem Moser es Ashur, he gave over the ox, le'adam acher, to Levi, shelo b'fnei alokeach, and Shimon, the buyer, was not there. V'amar lo, and Reuven says to Levi, Zechi, b'shor zeh, essentially accept this ox, lifloni, for Shimon, lios lo b'dinar basar, that a dinar's worth of it should belong to Shimon. So basically, the butcher had, right, so Reuven, the butcher, had Levi, a third party, make a kid. Well, it says Moser. I don't remember, is that different than a kinyan meshicha versus kinyan mesira? Maybe it's like a kinyan mesira. But basically, Levi is accepting this ox on behalf of Shimon, so that a dinar's worth of this ox will belong to Shimon, even though Shimon is not there. Now, why is Levi allowed to accept this dinar's worth of meat on behalf of Shimon, even though Shimon's not there? But again, Amar Shmuel bar Yitzchak, le'olam shelo mashach, u'kun shezika lo ayidei acher, that Ruvain, the butcher, had Levi accept the ox. He gave, right, he was Moser, the ox, to Levi, so that Levi would accept the ox, specifically a dinar's worth of it, on behalf of Shimon, the customer. And why does this work? By ba prakim elu dizchus ulo zach nadim shelo b'fanav. The reason why this works is because on Erev Shavuos, and Erev Shmini Atzeres, and Erev Pesach, and Erev Rosh Hashanah, a person needs meat. It is a priority. He's got Yom Tov coming up. He's got people coming over. He needs meat. And therefore, it is objectively beneficial that Shimon, the customer, should have a kinyan on his meat. And therefore this would constitute zachin la'adam shelo b'fanav. We can benefit a person even when he is not present. We don't need a person to be present to do something that will be beneficial for him. And we are saying that on these 4 days of the year, it is objectively beneficial to somebody to have meat, right? It's on his mind. It's something he needs to get done that day. He needs to make sure that there's meat for Yom Tov. And if the butcher wants to be mizakeh a dinar's worth of meat to have Levi be mizakeh the meat to Shimon, I said Shimon gets the meat, that is beneficial to him, and it belongs to Shimon, and that only works on these 4 times a year. B'shayim Mos Hashanah, however, the rest of the year, there isn't such an urgency to have meat. And we can't assume objectively that it is in Shimon's benefit to own this meat that he now needs to pay for, and that if the animal dies, it's his responsibility, and he loses his money, etc. The rest of the year, there isn't such a sense of urgency to have meat. On these specific days, there is a sense of urgency. So on these specific days, it's zachin l'adam shelo b'fanav, but b'shayim Mos Hashanah dechov hu lo, that it's an obligation to a person to have this commitment to this meat. So ein chavin l'adam shelo b'fanav, we can't make it, obligate a person when he is not present. But on these 4 days, we assume that it is to his benefit that he should be the owner of this meat, and now he owns it, and we force the butcher to shech the animal so that Shimon gets his meat. Rab Elazar Rab Yochanan says, Rab Yochanan, Ba'arba prakim elu, it is on these 4 times a year, ha'amidu chacham divreim al din teire. The chachamim stuck to the din deoraisa. If you remember from Perek Hazov, the 4th Perek of Masechta Bava Metzia, there was a whole shaila, machlekes Rish Lakish and Rabbi Yochanan, about is it the paying of the money that makes the kinyan, or is it the meshicha, the picking up of the object that makes the kinyan? Rish Lakish says it's the picking up of the object. Rabbi Yochanan says, look, mida oraisa, it's really the money that makes the kinyan. However, the Chachamim said that the kinyan is not going to be kona until the customer picks it up. But mida oraisa, technically speaking, once the money is given, a kinyan is made. Rabbi Yochanan says, Rabbi Yochanan, Dvar Torah that mida oraisa mos konos. Says Rabbi Yochanan, mida oraisa, it's the money that makes the kinyan. Umatam amru meshicha kona. Why did the Chachamim say that even so they made a gezerah that it's dafka the meshicha, the picking up of the item that's kona? Gezerah shema yomar lo nisifru chitecha ba'aliyah. You remember this concept from Nezikin? Out of concern for nisifru chitecha ba'aliyah. That it says Rabbi Yochanan, even though mida oraisa, when a person pays money for something, mida oraisa, he's the owner of it. But there is a concern. Nisifru chitecha ba'aliyah. But a person goes to buy wheat, and he pays money for the wheat. If we were to say that he now owns the wheat, now he hasn't taken the wheat yet. The wheat is still in the warehouse, but he paid for it. If we said that, look, mida oraisa, now he owns it, what if the fire breaks out in the warehouse? The owner or the seller has no incentive anymore to save the buyer's wheat, because it doesn't belong to the owner anymore. Once the buyer paid money for it, it belongs to the buyer. There's no longer any incentive for the seller to keep that wheat safe. Therefore, we say the buyer only owns the wheat once he picks it up. And generally speaking, once you pick it up, you're going to pick it up and take it home. So we say that until the buyer picks it up, it is still the responsibility of the seller. However, says Rabbi Yochanan, on these 4 times of the year, because, as we said, that there is a premium put on, customers need meat. They have Yom Tov coming up. So we say, you know what, on these days, these 4 days, we are just going straight up on the din Torah, on the din d'oraisa, that once the customer pays for his meat, he owns it, and that's where he's guaranteed that he's going to get his meat, even if it means that the butcher needs to shech an ox that's worth 1,000 zuz for him to get his 1 zuz worth of meat. He knows that he owns his meat, he paid for it, and it is his. Okay, woo. And friends, how was that throwback to Bava Metzia, Kinyonim, Perkazov, Shlokish, Rabbi Yochanan? I went to the Beis HaMedrash earlier today. I was thinking that was the cause of Misha Pora. Remember all those Misha Poras, Midora, was it Me'anchi Dora Babble? Koponim. We now get up to the next Mishnah where we define a day in the context of Osov Ezbino. Says the Mishnah, Yom Echad Omer Ba'osov Ezbino, when we talk about a day, right? Osov Ezbino, Lo Sishchatu B'Yom Echad. You shall not shech the mother and daughter on one day. How do we define a day? Hayom Olech Acher HaLaila. The day begins with the night. As Zodar Reb Shimon ben Zoma, and this Reb Shimon Achedrasha ben Zoma. That Shimon ben Zoma made this drasha. Shene right never b'maise breishis Yom Echad v'nemer b'osov ezbino b'Yom Echad. Yom Echad. That by maise breishis, of course, is Vayev Vayevoga Yom Echad. And here also says, why am I blanking on the pasuk? I've said it about 1,000 times. What does the pasuk say? Could somebody remind me? Osov ezbino lo tishchatu b'Yom Echad. So my Yom Echad Omer b'maise breishis Hayom Holech Achar Aloylo. Just like when it comes to maise breishis, the Yom Echad is Vayerev Vayevoker Yom Echad. The day begins with the night. So af Yom Echad Omer b'Osov ezbino Hayom Holech Achar Alayla. So as by Osov ezbino, the day begins with the night, and therefore, if a person shechs the mother in the afternoon, then they only need to wait until nighttime to shech the daughter. You don't need to wait 24 hours or something. It's already considered a new day. Comes night time. Says the Gemara, Tana Rabbanan the Rabbi thought as Zo Darsh Reb Shimon ben Zoma. This was the drasha of Ben Zoma the Fisher call a Inyan Kulo Einu B'Daber Ela B'Kodshim. Because after all, if you look in the context, it's Sefer Vayikra and Parshas Emor, there's a lot of korbanos talk in that section of the Torah. And of course, when it comes to kachim, as we know, the night follows the day. If you shecht a korban chatas, for example, during the day, so you can eat it that day and the following night. The night is connected to the day. So Yachol av Zekain, is it possible that we shall apply the same concept to Osov Ezbino, that when we talk about Yom Echad for Osov Ezbino, it means the day followed by the night? So Nemar Kan, Yom Echad, Nemar Ma'aseh Bereishis Yom Echad, it says Yom Echad by Osov Ezbino as well as by Ma'aseh Bereishis, my Yom Echad, Omer Ma'aseh Bereishis, Yom Olech Achar Aloylo, just like by Ma'aseh Bereishis, the day begins with the night. So Av Yom Echad, Omer Osov Ezbino, Yom Olech Achar Aloylo, also by Osov Ezbino, we are talking about the day beginning at nighttime. Rabbi Yom says, Rabbi, Yom Echad, Yom HaMiyuchad, when it says also as Lo Sishchatu B'Yom Echad, it means on a Yom HaMiyuchad, Ton Karuz, that these special days, these 4 days of the year, these unique days, Erev Yom Tov, you have to announce, the monger needs to inform his customers about the fact that they have to be concerned for also Bezbino, that he sold the mother earlier. Mikan Omer by Bob Prakim Bashana Hamoch Beim Lechaveru Tzarich Lodio. Based on that, right? Also Bezbino decision will be Yom Echad on a Yom HaMiyuchad. You have to inform. You have to let the people know about also the Ezbino. It is based on that we said in the previous Mishnah that on those 4 special days of the year, the animal mongers must inform their customers that they sold the mother earlier. You have to wait to shech the daughter until the next day. Hadron Oloch, Osov Ezbino. We'll come back to Perak Osov Ezbino. Unbelievable. Chaver, who here ever thought that they would be studying Perak Osov Ezbino in Masechta Chullin? What a privilege and a treat. Now we move on to Perak Kisui hadam. Says the Mishnah, Kisui hadam noyeg ba'aretz v'chutzlaretz. That Kisui hadam, who can remind us what Kisui hadam is? Kisui hadam is that by a chaya and by a oaf, when you shecht a chaya and an oaf, you need to, as the Gemara is going to describe in a few minutes, you need to first play. I about a month ago now, I went to a chicken shechita. And what we did was we had to take in some earth, some some dirt, and we put it there in the chatzer, my friend's courtyard, and we put down some dirt, and then shech the chicken, and then the blood, you make sure that some of the blood from the neck goes in the dirt, and then you cover it with more dirt. That's Kisui hadam. So says the Mishnah, Kisui hadam noeg be'aretz is noeg in Eretz Yisrael, like we did. Uvechutz la'aretz, but you would do the same in chutz la'aretz. B'fnei habayis v'shelo b'fnei habayis, whether there's a Beis Hamikdash, whether there is not yet a Beis Hamikdash. B'chulin avalo b'mukdashin, by non-sacrificial animals and birds. Well, obviously it wouldn't be by animals, because Kisui hadam is only by chayas, and chayas are not offered as korbanos. But by birds, you can have a turtle dove and a young dove offered as a korban, but there would be no Kisui hadam. So b'chulin v'lo b'mukdashin. So it's only by chulin, it's not by korbanos. V'noeg b'chaya uve'of, and it is specifically by chayas and by oafs. B'mezumim v'she'enum b'mezumim, whether it is your chayav oaf or whether you catch it, right? Whether it was domesticated, you already had it beforehand, or whether you had to get it. V'noeg b'koi, and by a koi, which we've learned so much about in the past week, which is a safek chaya, safek behema. So you do Kisui hadam pnei shu safek, because since we're not sure if it's a chaya or behema, so we're not sure if it needs Kisui hadam, so we do it anyways just in case. Ve'ein shochat, and also be Yom Tov, and we won't shecht a koi on Yom Tov for that same reason, because it's a safek, and we don't, we're not going to be mechal Yom Tov to do Kisui hadam for potentially no reason. Ve'im shochato ein mechasen es damo, and if you nonetheless did shecht a koi on Yom Tov, okay, you won't do Kisui hadam. Says the Gemara, Mukdashin my time alone. How come we do not do Kisui hadam by korbanos? Ilema mishum de Reb Zera. Maybe because of Reb Zera, who says, Dam Reb Zera hashoichet tzarich shitin offer lemata v'offer lemayla, as I described a minute ago, that when it comes to Kisui, that when you do shchita, hashoichet tzarich shitin offer lemata, you have to put dirt below, and then the blood goes on the dirt. V'offer lemayla, and you cover it on top again with dirt. It's like a blood sandwich, a dirt blood sandwich. Dirt, blood, dirt. Shenemar, as opposed to says v'shafach es damo, v'chiseu, probably right. V'chisahu. As the Bible says, v'shafach es damo, that you will spill the blood, v'chisahu be'ofar, in dirt. Lo nemar, offer lo nemar, doesn't say that you'll cover it with dirt, ela be'ofar, in dirt. That it needs to be, right, the blood needs to be in dirt. You have dirt below, you have dirt above. Okay. Lo efshar. And when it comes to a korban, it's impossible. So again, as I mentioned a few minutes ago, by korbanos, we're not talking about chayas. There are no chayas that are offered as korbanos. You don't offer a deer as a korban, for example, or an ibex. Now, however, there are birds that are offered as korbanos, Torim and Bnei Yonas. Now, when it comes to a Torah and a Ben Yonah, it's simply impossible to get that dirt below the blood. Hey, Chidavid, what are you going to do? Leisev v'libatle. What if you're going to put the dirt on the Beis Hamikdash, on the Mizbeach, and be mavatle and just leave it there as part of the Mizbeach? Well, that's a problem, because then it becomes, if you just leaving it as part of the Mizbeach, you're messing with the dimensions of Mizbeach. As we know, the Mizbeach has very specific dimensions. Kamosav abin, you're adding on to the Mizbeach. Uchsiv, hakol bichsav miyad Hashem ala iskil. That David HaMelech gave the blueprints to Shlomo HaMelech, hakol bichsav, everything in writing, miyad Hashem ala iskil, that everything came from the Rabbeinu Shalom and was then put in writing and given to Shlomo, very specific intentions, dimensions based on the specifications of none other than the Rabbeinu Shalom himself. We are not going to be adding dirt to mess with those dimensions, right? Just adding dirt and leaving it there on the Mizbeach and having it add up and become part of the Mizbeach. Lo levatle, and if you're not mevatle and just leaving it there forever, well, kahabya chatzitza. well then it's a chatzitza. If you're not going to leave it there to be part of the mizbeach, well then it is, the blood of these birds needs to be sprinkled on the mizbeach. If you're putting dirt on the mizbeach and it's not being sprinkled on the mizbeach, it's being sprinkled on dirt that's on the mizbeach, it's a chatzitza. It's a separation between the blood and the mizbeach. So the Gemara says, okay, fine, I get it. It's impossible on the mizbeach to get dirt below the blood. But nihid lamata lo efsher, l'mayla efsher. Okay, fine. So fine, we can't get dirt below the blood on the mizbeach, but we can always cover it above at the very least. Li'avid kisur, at least cover it. Milotani. After all, do we not learn in a brisa? I.e., we have the following brisa. Rabbi Yonasan ben Yosef Omer, shochat chaya v'achakach shochat behem. If you shecht a chaya and then there's blood on the floor, and then you shecht a behema and you cover the chaya blood now with behema, so you can't do kisui hadam anymore, right? The chaya blood has been covered by behema blood. You don't do kisui hadam with behema blood. So patur v'chasas, you don't do kisui hadam. Behema v'achaka chaya, but if you first shechted a behema and then on top of that you shechted a chaya v'chasos, you have to do kisui hadam, even though there won't be any dirt below the chaya blood. At the very least, put dirt above the chaya blood. So if that's the case, why don't we say that by korbanos, do you'll do you'll press the blood again, by chatas. Oh, for example, you'll press the blood against the mizbeach and sprinkle it, etc., and then cover it with dirt on top, even though you can't do below, but do it on top. Ein bila ma'akeves bo, v'choshe ein roi lebila, bila ma'akeves bo, and with that we will conclude. The famous shita of Reb Zera, haroi lebila, kol haroi lebila, ein bila ma'akeves bo, v'choshe ein roi lebila, bila ma'akeves bo. Of course, this is a sugya from Masechta Menachos, that if a person says, I'm going to bring a mincha that's 61 isarons of flour, so we say you have to bring it in 2 bowls, because in one mixing bowl, a mincha maxes out, a proper ratio of flour to oil maxes out in a mixing bowl at 60 isarons of flour to 1 log of oil. I think that this assumes, like the shita that says that for 60 isarons of flour, it would be just 1 log of oil rather than 60 logs of oil. So the ratio of flour to oil, to be able to actually mix it and do bila, to be able to mix the flour and oil together in the mixing bowl, maxes out at a ratio of 60 isarons to 1 log of oil. And therefore, the remainder of 1 isaron needs to go in its own mixing bowl. And we ask, but at the end of the day, bila, mixing the mincha, is not actually ma'akiv. If you didn't mix the mincha, it's still a kosher mincha. So what's the big deal? So what that if you put 61 isarons in the mixing bowl, you will be unable to mix it. You don't technically have to mix it anyways. But the point is, you have to be able to mix it. As long as you're able to mix it, even if you don't end up mixing it, okay, but at least the potential to do it is there. But to set yourself up milichatchila for a situation where even if you wanted to, you couldn't mix it, that is a problem. So therefore you have to take that remainder, that extra isaron, and put it in a different mixing bowl, so that at the very least, both mixing bowls, their contents would be able to be mixed. Here as well, we're not going to set up a situation on the mizbeach where it's impossible to do kisui hadam correctly, and we have to rely upon, we'll just do it on top. That is not okay. So therefore, in the situation where you shechted an animal, and on top of that you shechted a chaya, at least there was the potential that you could have put dirt under it. And therefore, you weren't able to put dirt under it, you shechted the animal, and then the chaya, whatever. Nish gefährlich. But to set yourself up milichatchila by korbanos where you know that it will be impossible to put any dirt below, that is not a situation that we are going to say that kisui hadam applies in, and therefore kisui hadam does not apply to korbanos. Chevra, we are going to hold it here for the Pei Gimel of Masechta Chullin. On Daf Pei Gimel of Masechta Chullin, we learned about meat mongers informing customers about oso ve'es bino. We said that this is 4 times per year. Erev Shmini Atzeres, Erev Pesach, Erev Shavuos, and Erev Rosh Hashanah. We had said that Rabbi Yossi Aglili had also added to that Erev Yom Kippur in the Galilee. We said that Erev Sukkot is excluded because people are so busy with their sukkahs and their lulavs that they aren't going to be, they're not necessarily going to be shechting that day. When purchases happen, so Rashi says that this is as long as the purchases, the mother and the daughter, are both sold on the same day. But if they're sold on different days, then you don't need to inform the customers. The Rambam learns it differently, which is that when the second purchase happens late in the day on one of these days, and it's clear that the customer is in a rush so that he can shecht it that same day, then you have to inform him that the mother was sold earlier. But if there's still plenty of time in the day, you don't have to make you don't have to inform him. And we said also when it comes to chassan and kala, even if they buy meat on different days, you have to let them know that they were sold, a mother and daughter, and to be careful not to shecht them both on the day of the chasana. We then discussed purchasing meat on Erev Yom Tov. This was the Bava Metzia Sugya. We had said that on Erev Yom Tov, once a person pays for his meat, so then it belongs to him, and we force the butcher to shecht the animal, even if it means that he has to shecht 1,000 zuz animals, so that this person get his 1 zuz of worth of meat. We say, why is that? After all, normally you only own something once you pick it up. So we gave 2 answers. One is Zachan Adam Shelo B'fanav, that the butcher was mizakeh by way of a third party, that the third party accepted the meat on behalf of the customer and was kona the meat on behalf of the customer, and that would be considered beneficial to the customer. Since on Erev Yom Tov, it's a priority for this customer to have meat. It's Yom Tov coming up, and we can assume that it is beneficial to the customer to own this meat in advance so that the butcher must shecht and provide the meat. Alternatively, we rely upon kinyan d'oraisa. Usually, right, so according to Rabbi Yochanan, in Masechta Bava Metzia Perek Hazov, about what actually makes the kinyan. Rish Lakish says that it is picking up the item that actually makes the kinyan. Rabbi Yochanan says it's the payment that actually makes the kinyan. However, even Rabbi Yochanan says that generally speaking, even though we do oraisa, it's the payment, we say that the Chacham say that you only own it once you pick it up. That's out of concern for Nisifu Chitecha Ba'aliyah, that if it's the money, if you paid for it and now you own it, if a fire breaks out in the storage house where the wheat that you own, that you paid for is, the seller has no incentive to save it. Therefore, we say once you pick it up and probably you're now going to end up taking it home, that is when you actually own it. But on these 4 days, Rabbi Yochanan says we don't make that gzeres chachamim, and instead we rely upon the din d'oraisa, which is that once he paid for it, he actually owns it. And on those 4 days of the year, we stick with the din d'oraisa, that once you paid for it, you own it, and therefore the butcher must shecht an animal to provide that meat to the customer who paid for it. We defined a day for Osav Ezbeno, which is that the day begins with the night, unlike Kodshim in Vayikra, where Osav Ezbeno is found. By Kodshim, of course, the day is the day followed by the night. If you shecht an animal during the day, you can eat the animal that day and the following night. It becomes noser the next morning. But by Osav Ezbeno, the day begins with the night. And with that we finished Perek Osav Ezbeno, and we are now in Perek Kisui Adam, and we learned a Mishnah that taught us some basic halachos about Kisui Adam, and we are currently in the middle of a sugya discussing why there is no Kisui Adam for Kodesh. Friends, that was Daf Pei Gimel, Daf 83 of Masechta Chullin. I hope you enjoyed. Have a great, great day. I guess it'll probably be Erev Tisha B'Av, so have a Givaldiga fast. I hope to see everybody in the Beis Hamikdash.